This story is about a trip I took with my best friend Alex, right after we graduated college. We were young, broke, and desperately wanted an adventure before settling into our 9-to-5 lives. We found this incredibly cheap cabin rental online, deep in the mountains of a state we'd never been to. The pictures showed a rustic, cozy little place surrounded by miles of dense forest. It looked perfect. The reviews were a little strange though. Most were glowing, but a few were just 1- or 2-word comments like unforgettable or an experience. One simply said, "Listen to the woods." We laughed it off as quirky and booked it for a week. The drive up was beautiful. We lost cell service about an hour away from the cabin, which we expected. It was part of the appeal of total disconnect. The final road to the cabin was a winding, unpaved dirt track that our small sedan struggled with. When we finally arrived, the place was just as advertised, maybe a little more run down. The air was crisp and smelled of pine and damp earth. It felt like we were the only 2 people on the planet. The first couple of days were amazing. We hiked, we swam in a nearby creek, and at night we'd sit on the porch, staring at a blanket of stars we'd never seen in the city. It was pure bliss. The quiet was absolute. But on the 3rd night, things started to feel ... Off we were inside playing cards when we heard a noise from outside. It was a faint, rhythmic tapping sound. Tap, tap, tap. It sounded like someone was knocking on a tree with a rock far off in the woods. We went out on the porch to listen. The sound continued for a few minutes and then just stopped. We figured it was a woodpecker or some other animal and went back inside, a little unsettled but not truly scared. The next night, it happened again. This time, the tapping was closer. It was distinct, deliberate. It wasn't an animal. Alex, ever the brave one, cupped his hands around his mouth and shouted, "Hello. Is anyone out there?" The tapping stopped instantly. Silence flooded the clearing, a heavy, watchful silence that felt more unnerving than the noise itself. We quickly locked the doors and windows, our sense of peaceful isolation now feeling more like dangerous vulnerability. We didn't sleep much that night. Every creak of the old cabin made us jump. The 5th day was gray and overcast. A thick fog rolled in, blanketing the entire area and reducing visibility to just a few feet. We decided to stay inside. That afternoon, as I was making coffee, I glanced out the kitchen window, and my heart stopped. Standing at the edge of the woods, just barely visible through the mist, was a figure. It was tall and unnaturally thin, standing completely still, just watching the cabin. It was too far to make out any details, but it was unmistakably human-shaped. I grabbed Alex's arm, my hand shaking, and pointed. He saw it too. We just stared, frozen for what felt like an eternity. Then, as if it knew we'd seen it, the figure slowly retreated back into the fog and disappeared. We were terrified. This was no longer a fun adventure. We decided we had to leave first thing in the morning. Packing would be too risky in the dark. We barricaded the door with a heavy wooden table and spent the night huddled together in the living room, armed with a fire poker and a heavy-duty flashlight. Sleep was impossible. Every shadow seemed to move. Every gust of wind sounded like footsteps. Then came the worst part. Around 3 in the morning, the tapping started again. But this time, it wasn't in the woods. It was on the walls of the cabin. Tap, tap, tap. Tap, tap, tap. Slow, deliberate, moving around the house. First on the back wall, then the side, then the front. It was like something was circling us, testing the walls, letting us know it was right there. We were too scared to even breathe. Alex was white as a sheet, and I could feel my own heart hammering against my ribs. Then we heard a scratching sound at the front door. A long, slow scrape, like fingernails dragging down the wood. It was followed by a soft, guttural whisper. The fog was so thick we couldn't see anything through the windows, but we could hear it. It wasn't speaking words, just making these low, breathy sounds. We stayed completely silent, backs pressed against the far wall, hoping it would think the cabin was empty and just go away. The scratching continued for what felt like hours. At one point, the doorknob began to jiggle. Slowly at first, then more violently. We watched in horror as the old brass knob turned back and forth, the lock rattling in its frame. We were convinced the door was about to burst open. And then, just as suddenly as it began, everything stopped. The sun started to rise, and the thick fog began to burn away. The silence that followed was deafening. We waited, barely daring to move, until the sun was fully up and light was streaming through the windows. Cautiously, we moved the table away from the door. Alex, holding the fire poker like a spear, slowly unlatched it and pulled it open. There was no one there. But on the door, at about eye level, were 3 long, deep scratches gouged into the wood. And below them, smeared into the grain, was a dirty, hand-shaped print. It was too large to be human, with fingers that were far too long and thin. We didn't even pack. We grabbed our wallets and keys, ran to the car, and didn't look back. We sped down that dirt track, branches scraping the sides of the car, not slowing down until we hit paved roads and saw another car. When we finally got cell service back, we called the rental company. We didn't tell them the whole story. We were afraid they'd think we were crazy. We just said we had a family emergency and had to leave early. The woman on the phone was oddly understanding. Almost too understanding. Before she hung up, she said something that still chills me to the bone. She said, "I hope you enjoyed your unforgettable experience. We never found out what was in those woods." We looked up local folklore, searched for news reports of missing people or strange sightings in that area, but found nothing concrete. It was like our experience happened in a vacuum. Sometimes I wonder if it was all in our heads, a product of isolation and fear. But then I remember the scratches on the door and that unnaturally large handprint. And I remember the sound of the tapping, getting closer and closer each night. We went looking for an adventure, a story to tell, and we got one. It's just not the story we ever wanted. To this day, I can't stand being in a quiet house at night. The silence is never truly empty. Sometimes, if I listen closely, I can almost hear it. Tap, tap, tap. Thanks for watching, and remember to be careful what you wish for. Stay safe out there. Have you ever been on a vacation that felt just a little bit off? One of those trips where everything seems perfect on the surface. But there's this strange, unsettling feeling you just can't shake. I have a story like that. A story that started as the perfect European getaway and turned into something I'll never be able to forget. It's a story I've told only a few times, because honestly, it still gives me chills to even think about it. It was a few summers ago. My best friend Chloe and I had been saving up for months for a backpacking trip across Italy. We were fresh out of college, full of energy, and ready for adventure. We planned to see Rome, Florence, Venice, all the classic spots. But we also wanted to experience something authentic, something off the beaten path. So we decided to spend a week in a tiny, remote village in the Tuscan countryside that we found on some obscure travel blog. The pictures looked idyllic: rolling hills, ancient stone houses, fields of sunflowers. It was described as a place frozen in time. We couldn't have known then how true that was. We arrived by a rickety local bus that seemed to be the only link to the outside world. The village was exactly as picturesque as the photos, perched on a hill overlooking a stunning valley. The air was warm and smelled of rosemary and damp earth. Our rental was a small 2-story stone house at the very edge of the village, owned by an elderly woman named Signora Elena. She was sweet, with a kind, wrinkled face, but she spoke no English. And our Italian was basically limited to ciao and gelato. We communicated mostly through smiles and gestures. Before she left, she handed us a heavy, ornate iron key. She pointed at the door, then made a locking gesture and tapped her chest, saying something with a serious tone. We just smiled and nodded, assuming she was just telling us to be sure to lock up. The first couple of days were blissful. We explored the winding cobblestone streets, hiked through the hills, and spent our evenings sipping local wine on our little balcony, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. The village was incredibly quiet. Almost too quiet. We noticed we were the only tourists. In fact, we rarely saw anyone under the age of 60. The few villagers we did encounter would give us polite but distant nods. Sometimes we'd catch them staring at us from their windows, their faces disappearing as soon as we looked their way. We brushed it off as small-town curiosity. They probably weren't used to seeing outsiders. The strange things started on the third night. We were sitting on the balcony when we heard it, a faint melodic chanting coming from the direction of the old church in the center of the village. It was late, well past midnight. The sound was beautiful, but also deeply eerie. It wasn't a hymn we recognized. It was rhythmic, almost hypnotic, and it seemed to go on for hours. Chloe and I looked at each other, a little spooked. We tried to convince ourselves it was just a local religious festival we didn't know about. The next day, we tried to ask a shopkeeper about the chanting, using a translation app on my phone. When he read the question, his friendly demeanor vanished. He just shook his head, looking almost scared, and quickly turned away to help another customer. It was the first time we felt genuinely unwelcome. That night, the chanting happened again, only this time it sounded closer, more intense. And we started noticing other things. The village had a strange symbol carved into many of the old doorways and on the stone well in the main square. It looked like a sort of spiral with 3 lines radiating from the center. We hadn't paid it much attention before, but now it seemed to be everywhere. On our 5th day, we decided to go for a long hike, hoping to clear our heads. After about an hour, we stumbled upon a clearing. And in the center of the clearing was a circle of large, weathered stones, almost like a miniature Stonehenge. They were ancient, covered in moss and lichen. And carved into the largest stone, right in the middle, was that same spiral symbol. There were no signs, no paths leading to it. It felt hidden, secret. A cold feeling washed over me. This was something old, something the village didn't want people to see. We hurried back to the house. The magic of the countryside completely gone, replaced by a growing sense of dread. That night, the air felt heavy and oppressive. We couldn't sleep. The chanting started again. But this time, it wasn't just coming from the church. It sounded like it was all around us, echoing through the empty streets. We locked ourselves in the house, our hearts pounding. That's when I remembered Senora Elena's warning. It wasn't just a simple reminder to lock the door. It was a serious, urgent plea. Around 2 a.m., we heard footsteps outside. Slow, shuffling footsteps circling the house. Then a soft tapping began at the front door. Tap, tap, tap. It was gentle, almost polite, which somehow made it even more terrifying. We were frozen in our beds, barely breathing. The tapping stopped, and then we heard a faint scratching sound, like fingernails dragging across the old wood. Chloe started crying silently. I grabbed my phone, but there was no service. We were completely cut off. The scratching went on for what felt like an eternity before finally fading away. We stayed awake until the sun came up, huddled together in one room, listening to every creak and groan of the old house. The next morning, we knew we had to leave. We packed our bags in a frantic rush. I went to open the front door, and my blood ran cold. On the outside of the door, scratched into the wood, was the spiral symbol. It hadn't been there before. We didn't even stop to return the key. We ran out of the house, not daring to look back, and sprinted through the silent village streets towards the bus stop on the main road. The village was eerily still. As we ran past the main square, I glanced over and saw a small group of the elderly villagers standing there, watching us. They weren't smiling. Their faces were completely blank, their eyes dark and empty. It was the most chilling sight I've ever seen. The bus, thankfully, arrived on schedule. We tried to forget, to pretend it was just our imaginations running wild, but we couldn't. I still don't know what was happening in that village. Was it some ancient cult, a local tradition we stumbled into? I've looked for the village on maps and online since, but I can never find the exact one. It's like it doesn't exist. That vacation taught me a valuable lesson. Some places are left off the map for a reason, and some secrets are meant to stay buried. Thanks for listening. If you have a scary travel story of your own, I'd love to hear it in the comments. Stay safe out there, and don't forget to follow for more stories. Ever had that feeling on vacation where something just isn't right? That little chill that runs down your spine, even in a tropical paradise. Well, today, we're rediving into 3 true vacation stories that will make you think twice before you book your next getaway. These aren't your typical ghost stories. These are real, unsettling experiences from travelers just like you. Our first story comes from a Reddit user named Alex, who is backpacking through Southeast Asia. He and his friend decided to stay in a remote guest house in the Cambodian jungle, miles from any town. It was beautiful, but also incredibly isolated. The owner was a strange, quiet man who never seemed to blink. The first night, Alex woke up around 3 a.m. to the sound of soft, rhythmic chanting coming from outside their bungalow. He peeked through the blinds and saw the owner standing in a clearing, staring directly at their window, just chanting in the moonlight. It wasn't aggressive, just ... unnerving. He woke his friend, but by the time his friend looked, the man was gone. They tried to brush it off, but for the next 2 nights, the same thing happened. Same time, same chanting, same unblinking stare. They did unsleep a wink on their last night and packed their bags before the sun was even up. They left without saying goodbye, feeling like they had narrowly escaped being part of some bizarre ritual. They never found out what the chanting was for, and frankly, they didn't want to know. Next up, a family trip to a quaint, historic inn in New England. Sarah and her family were excited to stay in a place that dated back to the 1700s. The innkeeper told them stories about the building's history, but conveniently left out the creepy parts. On their second night, Sarah's youngest daughter Lily, who was 6, started talking to an imaginary friend she called Constance. At first, Sarah thought it was cute, but then Lily started sharing details about Constance that were strangely specific. She said Constance missed her family and that she fell asleep in the cellar a long time ago. Sarah got a little spooked and did a quick search of the inn's history. She found an old newspaper article about a young girl named Constance who had tragically passed away in the inn's cellar during a harsh winter in the 1780s. That night, Lily woke up screaming, pointing at the corner of the room, crying that Constance was sad and wanted her to come play in the cellar. The family checked out in the middle of the night, leaving a note and way too much money on the counter. Some history is better left in the books. Our final story is a modern nightmare. A couple, Mark and Chloe, rented a chic, high-tech Airbnb in a bustling European city. It had all the smart home features you could imagine: lights, speakers, locks, all controlled by a central tablet. On their first evening, as they were getting ready for dinner, the smart speaker in the living room suddenly turned on, playing a very old, distorted lullaby. They turned it off, thinking it was a glitch. A few hours later, after they came back from dinner, they found all the lights in the apartment flickering on and off in a chaotic rhythm. Then the TV switched on by itself. cycling through channels of static. They tried to use the control tablet, but it was completely unresponsive. The scariest part? The front door, which was a smart lock, wouldn't open. They were trapped. They could hear the lullaby start to play again, this time from the bedroom speaker. Panicked, Mark managed to find a manual override for the lock hidden in a closet, and they bolted, leaving all their luggage behind. They reported it to Airbnb, and the listing was taken down. They suspect the owner was remotely controlling the house, a terrifying thought. It's a chilling reminder that sometimes the scariest things aren't supernatural, but very, very human. So, what do you think? Have you ever had a vacation experience that left you with goosebumps? Share your stories in the comments below. I'd love to read them. And if you enjoyed these creepy tales, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more unsettling content. Thanks for watching, and stay safe on your travels.